Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I don't usually make a lot of live videos, especially not when I'm driving, but my buddy Yusuf Rios, Sheikh Yusuf, he does it a lot, so I figured I'd try to do one for him since he made me such a nice post today. And you know what he said, I really appreciated, and it means a lot to me. You know, I look at him as my teacher and as my friend, and I look at myself as a student to him. And he is older than me, more senior than me, knows way more than me, and he went to Azhar, mashallah, which is a really amazing institution that was founded in about the 950s, Gregorian, so the 10th century, by the Fatimid Empire, which was a Shi'i Ismaili dynasty. And just because I love history so much, I'll talk about it. Basically, the Ismailiyya, they're also called the Sab'iyya, or the Seveners, and you have within Imami Shi'ism, or 12er Shi'ism, you have 12 Imams, hence 12er Shi'ism. And the Seveners, they only go to 7 Imams, and then they break off from the 12ers. Some of them, they decided there's never going to be another Imam. Other ones, they followed a living Imam. And that was the case for the Fatimids. And it's thought that after the 7th Imam, Ismail, died, that they went to some rural mountains in Syria, and they probably wrote in this intermediary time between the 7th Imam Ismail and kind of the nascent beginnings of the Fatimid Empire, to have written a book called Ikhwan, as-Safa, the Brethren of Purity. And this book is really interesting. So when I was in Egypt, in Cairo, doing Arabic studies, I had them focus on this text in particular because it covers like a wild, vast array of knowledge, and it has a lot of Greek kind of things in it, things that were translated likely by Christians who spoke Arabic, Middle Eastern Christians, from the original Greek into Arabic, which the Umayyads and the Abbasids, especially the Abbasids, commissioned. They used like the Caliphate money, you know, Bayt al-Mal, like basically government funded these translations. And so within the text Ikhwan as-Safa, you'll find things about like tabi'iyat, things from nature, or like natural science, you might call it. There's like, you know, Greek philosophy in it. You find mathematics. I remember going over a trigonometry text when I was in Egypt from Ikhwan as-Safa, which was kind of interesting to learn, you know, mathematical terminology in Arabic. And it had a lot of things that were, I guess you might say, kind of spiritual or philosophical and theological. And sometimes, you know, some of it, like, you couldn't tell that this might have been a Shi'i text. Like, it was kind of, they wrote it in an ambiguous way. And because of that, the text became wildly popular amongst even Sunnis and other strains of Islam, because there's a lot of you know, gems of knowledge from it that you can take. And the main reason that I was interested in the text, besides just how good it is pedagogically for learning Arabic, was because it's thought that Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, Shaykh al-Akbar, he read the text extensively and used it, or was influenced by it for many of his texts, especially the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. And I was writing an article at the time about Ibn Arabi and his stance in fiqh. Which madhab does he follow? I claim that he's Zahiri. I still claim that. Recent research, even Claudia Das's new article from the Journal of Ibn Arabi Society, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, volume 65. That article there, I think she called it The Radiant Way, still had me pretty convinced that Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi is a Zahiri. She kind of traced his ijazas in that article. And I disagree with her on a historiographical level. Some of these people who disagree with me on this particular issue, they usually say, well, Ibn Arabi himself, there's no explicit statement coming from himself where he says, I'm a Zahiri. And while this is true, I find that to be completely irrelevant to the situation, to the discussion, because ultimately, and this is what I tried to argue in my article that was in volume 64, was that Ibn Arabi himself, when you look at his section in the Futuhat on Furu' al-Fiqh, on the 5 pillars, he will give the opinion of each madhab. And it's well known that Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi was an expert and regularly consulted Bidayat al-Mujtahid from Ibn Rushd. And it's thought that he had met Ibn Rushd in person. And so Bidayat al-Mujtahid, for anybody who hasn't read it, first of all, you should go read it. But that book is, it's enormously beneficial. But what it does is it's a primer, or a trainer to train a mufti. So this is what they use to train muftis, and basically it teaches you legal reasoning from, you might say, a comparative fiqh standpoint, but I kind of hesitate to call it comparative fiqh. But it's talking about how basically you could have all the different madhabs, and here it's talking about the historical madhabs that go beyond just the 4 madhahib that we know today. It also talks about Imam Awza'i, Imam Layth, Abu Dawud al-Zahiri, who founded the Zahiri madhab, and so on. And it'll show how, from the same proof, whether it be the same ayah of Quran or the same hadith, how the different madhabs, given their hermeneutical method, or their Asul fiqh, their legal epistemology, whatever you want to call it, will interpret that verse or that hadith in a different way, which produces a different ruling. Me, myself, I'm very much into Asul fiqh. I consider that more my specialty. So what I was looking at mainly with Ibn Arabi, and this is what I tried to allude to in my article, was that taking from the Bidayat al-Mujtahid, he will show this is what the Hanafi madhab does. He won't. What he does is he'll just say, some people say da-da-da-da-da, keza wa keza. And it's clearly, anybody who studied fiqh, it's obviously the Hanafi opinion. It's the Hanafi mu'tamad, even now, but especially back then. And then he would go on and he'd give the Maliki opinion, and then he'd give the Shafi'i opinion, and then he'd give the Hanbali opinion, / because sometimes it was the same, / Zahiri opinion. And he would say, before giving the Zahiri opinion, a lot of times he would say, walana, which means and for us, and then he'd give the Zahiri opinion. Or he would say, wafi madhabuna, wafi madhabina, keza wa keza, and that would be the Zahiri opinion. So he clearly said, in my group or in my madhab, we follow the Zahiri opinion. And so that's kind of the main impetus for me to say, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi was a Zahiri in fiqh. That being said, he's also widely known to be his own mujtahid. He exercised his own ijtihad. And so, he doesn't agree with Ibn Hazm or Abu Dawud al-Zahiri or, any of the preceding, Zahiris, just blindly, like he's a muqallid. No, he exercises his own legal judgment. And then if you go into chapter 88 of the Futuhat, that's his chapter on Usul fiqh. And there, very similarly to classical Zahirism, he basically has a giant polemic against qiyas, which is the hallmark or the cornerstone, the bedrock of Zahiri Usul fiqh. You can look at, al-Ihkam from Ibn Hazm, and the Muhalla, if you want to say the Furu' al-Fiqh from Zahiris. But I guess like anybody who studied fiqh traditionally, and not in the Western Academy, but like traditionally in like a madrasa or Islamic university will know, typically what's the Zahiri opinion, because many of the Usul fiqh books out there, and even some of the Furu' al-Fiqh books that are more comparative, like al-Mughni, they're going, al-Mughni from Ibn Qudama, that they're going to show what's the Zahiri opinion from time to time. And there they'll say the same things that Ibn Arabi is saying. So besides just Zahiri sources, you can also find opinions reported about Zahiris from their contemporaries, you might say. And I also traced in my article how the Zahiri madhab was active and being actively transmitted in Andalusia during the time of Ibn Arabi. In fact, Abu Dawud al-Zahiri's he had two direct students who went to Andalusia right away, and I believe it was the early 900s. And I believe that Zahiris remained there all the way until the Inquisition from the Catholic Spanish, and when many of the Muslims were expelled out of Spain or forced to convert and become Moriscos. And so basically, I'm just ranting right now, kind of on a tangent, just talking to talk. But I think this stuff is beneficial history, because during this period in Islamic history, you had the Umayyad Caliphate in Islamic Spain, and then in between Islamic Spain and the Abbasid Caliphate, you had the Fatimid Caliphate. And the Fatimids were very anti-Sunni. The Abbasids were very anti-Fatimid. If you proclaimed yourself a Fatimid openly in public in the Abbasid Caliphate, you're likely to be killed on the spot. There's many reports of that happening in the historical sources. And, I assume the same in Fatimid Egypt as well. So to travel between Baghdad and Andalusia at the time was, I think, really difficult. I want to say impossible, but I suppose, it's possible if you could really disguise yourself or something of that nature. But all this to say that, because of the proximity of the Fatimids to Islamic Spain, Ikhwan as-Safa, which is this Ismaili text from the Fatimids, became widely popular in Andalusia. And each little chapter of the Ikhwan as-Safa, it usually begins like something, Ayyadak Allah ayyuhal akhi, something like that, like Allah supports you, oh my dear brother, something of that nature. And Ibn Arabi uses this invocation quite often in the Futuhat, I noticed as well. So there's this connection between what's called the Mu'tabirun movement, or that's like the type of Sufism or mysticism or spirituality, Islamic spirituality that existed in Andalusia. And it was based on i'tibar, which means in their context, contemplating the signs of God, the ayatullah, in nature. And if you do this i'tibar, or ibra, which means to cross over a bridge or something like that, if you do this i'tibar, you're going to cross into the unseen, into the ghaib. Through this type of contemplation, you're going to get futuhat, or you're going to get some type of spiritual openings, some type of, don't want to say like revelation per se, but, visions, experiences, things that, are supposed to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what they call tajalliyat, or theosophies. And so that idea, I think, genealogically, you could say some of it comes from Ikhwan as-Safa, and then the Sunnis in Islamic Spain appropriated it into their worldview. So they maintained their Sunni worldview, they maintained their Ash'arism, they maintained their Maliki affiliations, but then would take kernels or gems of haqq, from the Ikhwan as-Safa. And that started, I believe, with Ibn Masarra, who's from the 10th century in Islamic Spain, and it goes all the way down through many other kind of spiritual leaders, including Ibn Rajan, who's like an intermediary figure between Ibn Masarra and Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi. And one of my professors back at the University of Chicago, Yusuf Kaiswit, he's probably the world expert in Ibn Rajan. He did his PhD dissertation on Ibn Rajan. He's done most of his research on Ibn Rajan. He worked on Ibn Rajan's tafsir and brought it into modern print, where it was only previously as a Arabic manuscript. So he brought it out from a text that was allegedly lost. He brought it to light, and this tafsir very famously. It's like there's this very famous story where Ibn Rajan predicts the conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders. And so during the time of Salahuddin, one of his sheikhs came across this tafsir from Ibn Rajan. So there was somehow, even with the Fatimid Caliphate, texts were spreading from the east to the west, from the Maghrib to the Mashriq. And so somehow Ibn Rajan's tafsir had made it all the way to the Middle East, and one of Salahuddin's sheikhs had found this text and told Salahuddin, that it was predicted that, Jerusalem was going to be conquered by the Crusaders, and that it was going to be reconquered by the Muslims on a certain date, and that is in fact the date that Salahuddin was able to reconquer Jerusalem. So then some people talk about, okay, well, is this actually like you might say a prognostication? I don't want to say prophecy, because I'm not trying to say Ibn Rajan is a prophet, but he made a prediction that came true. Or was it that Salahuddin Ayyubi just found out about this and then tried to make his conquest fit that date? Either way, it all fits into Qadr the same way. So in a sense, the question is a little irrelevant. But what I'm trying to highlight and talk about is, how important it is to know Islamic history, because all of these things are interconnected. It was Salahuddin Ayyubi who would later go on to conquer and topple over the Fatimids and make Azhar into a Sunni institution. So all of this stuff comes like full circle. And I gave this big long story just to kind of emphasize Islamic history and its importance, and to also emphasize, that when we know Islamic history, or when we have a better understanding of it, then we are going to better understand Islam in context, so to say. So like perhaps when we read fatwa from an old mufti of the medieval period, if we understand the historical context in which that mufti was operating, what was the social reality that his people were dealing with at that time, which is unspoken in the text, then we'll have a much better understanding of why that ruling was made, and why for them that ruling was so crucial at that time, in that moment, at that place. And then with that full understanding, we can figure out, okay, so does that apply today? Do we have those circumstances today? And that helps us better understand, okay, should we have a similar fatwa today for the same, issue, mas'ala? Or is the mas'ala actually fundamentally different today? So history I find to be extremely crucial for understanding the Islamic sciences. And unfortunately, many Muslims, they almost want to treat the Islamic sciences as if they're a Western science. They, unknowingly have adopted Western epistemologies into their ways of thinking. And they look at the Islamic sciences as kind of in a way being timeless or not affected by historical circumstances, which is just simply not true. There is a genealogy as to how the Islamic sciences developed over time, and how scholars improved and worked and changed things to fit their contemporary time, right? There are some fundamental unchangeable principles, but the application of the Islamic sciences, that will change. There are certain things about it that will change. And I think that one of the reasons me and Yusuf Rios, Sheikh Yusuf, get along so well is he has a very clear understanding of that as well, in my opinion. And, oftentimes in life I've always felt very, very misunderstood by other Muslims especially, and by the broader public, you might say. Because, the deeper you go into these Islamic sciences, the deeper you go into history, I guess the more of a nuanced, intellectual kind of understanding you start to get of these things. And I'm not trying to say that I'm, super knowledgeable or this and that or anything, but what I'm trying to say is that, because I focused on history, I think more than most people, it's given me a different perspective and a different outlook. And me and Yusuf Rios are able to connect on that level, I feel very strongly. And me and him, we share a lot of the same opinions. And it's true that we don't agree on everything, but we agree on quite a bit. And personality-wise, we get along quite strongly. And I really wanted to make a point in my life to have a documented, connection to him, isnad to him. And so I sat and did part of the Arba'in Nawawi with him in order to get that, because I value that and I want that to be part of my legacy, that I met this person. That's an important part of my life that I want people to know about, because I find him to be such a special person, and I find him to be truly a hidden gem in America. So I want to beseech all of you to take advantage of him and his knowledge and his expertise, because he is one of the luminaries, I think, of our time here in America. And I guess that'll be it for the video. Thank you very much for listening, and Assalamu alaikum.